Being unstoppable in the UFC is a very rare thing to happen. However, in recent years, we have seen a glimpse of unstoppable forces in the UFC who have achieved a certain level in their career where certain fighters have looked unbeatable for a brief moment. So here is 5 unstoppable forces in the UFC. Number 5. When Nick Diaz defeated BJ Penn at UFC 137, he called out GSP, saying that GSP was scared to fight him. GSP was furious, saying that Nick Diaz was one of the most disrespectful human beings that he had ever met and promised he would put a beating on him. George St. Pierre was set to make his 8th title defense against Nick Diaz at UFC 158. He had mentioned that he had a lot of demons in his head but kept them inside because he's a nice guy. He also mentioned that he has a dark place to find motivation and uses this dark place to take his career to the next level. Dark Places GSP showed up at UFC 158, where in the fight, he was always one step ahead of Nick Diaz, where he was quickly able to land strikes and was able to control Nick Diaz on the ground to win the fight by a unanimous decision. This Dark Place GSP talks about certainly helped him elevate his skills to a new level and show that Dark Places GSP was a dominant force inside the octagon. Number 4. When Rafael dos Anjos pulled out of his fight with Conor McGregor at UFC 196, Nate Diaz, who was on a yacht in Cabo partying, was given the call to step in on 2 weeks' notice and face Conor McGregor in a 3-round welterweight bout at UFC 196. Leading up to the fight, Conor McGregor underestimated Cabo Nate's skills, where he was saying that he would easily finish him in the earlier rounds. In the fight, we saw Cabo Nate's ability to withstand damage was taken to a whole new level as Conor McGregor hit him with his best shots and wasn't able to put him away. We also saw Cabo Nate's conditioning on 2 weeks' notice was able to withstand the barrage of punches, where he eventually tagged Conor McGregor in the second round and was able to get a rear naked choke finish. Cabo Nate is one of the most durable fighters when he is called in on short notice, and his victory over Conor McGregor was arguably one of his best performances in his UFC career, where it shows he is always ready for war even if he is partying in Cabo. Number 3. Cyrus Anderson made his UFC debut, absolutely destroying Chris Lieben at UFC Fight Night 5. He next knocked out then UFC middleweight champion Rich Franklin in the first round, becoming the new UFC middleweight champion of the world. Cyrus Anderson went on to defend his title 10 times against the top middleweights at that time. Cyrus Anderson became less serious as he started to look invincible inside the octagon. Cyrus Anderson slowly started to clown around during his fights, which played well into his opponents making mistakes. His 11th title defense was scheduled to be against Chris Weidman at UFC 162. In the fight, Anderson Silva was clowning around, mocking Chris Weidman. Chris Weidman then threw a flurry of punches, clipping Anderson Silva with a left hook, dropping him to the canvas, where he rained down punches, finishing the fight by TKO, becoming the new UFC middleweight champion of the world. Cyrus Anderson was one of the most scariest fighters in the UFC, where he was just focused on getting the finish and was less focused on clowning around in the fight. Number 2. Level Cain is one of the most dominant forces in the UFC today. He is known for his enormous gas tank and his ferocious beatdowns he puts on his opponents. His violent fighting style, mixed with his ability to completely maul his opponents, has led him to become the 2-time UFC heavyweight champion. Although many injuries have set him back, Level Cain didn't seem to have any weaknesses. But once he faced Fabricio Verdum at UFC 188 in a title unification bout in Mexico, in the fight, his biggest weakness was revealed. This weakness was altitude. Level Cain was seen to fade away as the fight progressed, where he became sluggish in his movements, and his conditioning didn't help him one bit in the fight. He was easily getting tagged by Fabricio Verdum, where he desperately went for a takedown in the 3rd round, in which he ended up in a guillotine choke and was forced to tap. Level Cain is still a force to be reckoned with, but once he is forced to fight outside his comfort zone, his ability to fight is affected severely. Number 1. In 2013, TRT Vitor was one of the unstoppable forces in the UFC middleweight division. He developed superhuman abilities in which he was able to execute wild spinning kicks and could end the fight with a single strike. All of his abilities were taken to a whole new level where he looked untouchable inside the octagon. TRT Vitor made his first appearance when he knocked out Michael Bisping via a head kick in the 2nd round at UFC on FX 7. He next knocked out Luke Rockhold via a spinning heel kick in the 1st round at UFC on FX 8, and then knocked out Dan Henderson via a head kick in the 1st round at UFC Fight Night 32. After 3 very violent finishes, he was next in line for a shot at then UFC middleweight champion Chris Weidman. The Nevada State Athletic Commission banned the usage of testosterone replacement therapy, where TRT Vitor was no more. Both Vitor Belfort and Chris Weidman eventually faced off at UFC 187, where Chris Weidman absolutely destroyed him in the 1st round. The difference in his physique was huge, as he looked so small compared to TRT Vitor. His superhuman abilities are no more, and now is currently 1-4 in his last 5 fights.